somewhere out there, beyond the maps of men, a ship sleeps. Its timbers are broken, its flags long eaten away, yet the name still hums through the deep like a forgotten chord. Nuestra Señora de las Mercedes. She lies wrapped in silt and silence, a cradle of gold and sorrow. Above her, 2 centuries of tides pass unnoticed. Below her decks, the dust of lives gone still clings to coins, each one a tiny mirror of the world that made it. The ocean guards her jealously. It hides its wounds well. But even the deepest secret, in time, draws breath again. 200 years before her rediscovery, Spain stood weary but proud. The crown's reach still stretched across oceans, from the silver veins of Peru to the quiet ports of the Mediterranean. Yet every empire trembles when its foundations are made of gold. In the harbors of Montevideo, the Mercedes waited, her hull freshly tarred, her decks bright under morning light. She was small for the load she was meant to carry, a warship built for swiftness, not abundance. Yet the holds were already stacked with chests of silver reels and golden escudos. Each chest bore the scent of cedar and dust, the mark of 1,000 hands. Miners, assayers, soldiers, and priests. Beside them, barrels of cocoa, cochineal dye, and letters sealed with wax. Fragments of daily life mingling with the wealth of nations. On the quayside, families gathered. Children craned to see the masts. Wives whispered blessings. Sailors crossed themselves before climbing the gangplank. They knew the Atlantic well, its moods, its caprice, its appetite. But they also knew their orders. Sail for Cadiz, deliver the treasure, return before war returned to Europe. The Mercedes would not travel alone. 3 sister ships, Clara, Farmer, and Medea, formed her convoy. 4 white sails against a pale sky, each one carrying a share of Spain's fading glory. When the anchors lifted, the sound was like chains loosening from stone. The gulls wheeled above, the wind leaned full into the rigging. The city shrank behind them, and the sea opened like an endless promise. For weeks they moved west to east, tracing the curve of the earth. At dawn, the decks glowed amber. At dusk, violet shadow rose from the waves. The ocean was a breathing thing, sometimes still as glass, sometimes rolling with low murmurs that kept the men awake in their hammocks. In the evenings they sang rough-voiced hymns, fragments of folk tales from Andalusia and Lima alike. Gold was a distant concept then. The sea made men small, but when the hold doors were opened for inspection, when candlelight touched the chests and coins gleamed like captured suns, silence would fall. Even the officers felt it. That electric awe, that fragile thread between faith and greed. Captain José Bustamante kept a journal. In it, he wrote of weather, of discipline, of home. On September 29th, he noted, "All is calm. May God keep us thus. No one knew that within a week, calm will be replaced by fire." By early October, the Portuguese coast appeared, a grey smear beneath layered clouds. The crew prepared to make landfall. The wind softened to a sigh. They were almost home. But the Atlantic has a way of bending destiny. Far to the northwest, another set of sails had appeared, British. 4 frigates under Commodore Graham Moore patrolling the same waters. Britain and Spain were not officially at war. Diplomats still spoke of peace, yet suspicion had already taken root. The British Admiralty feared that Spanish gold would feed Napoleon's armies. They were ordered to intercept, peacefully if possible, forcibly if not. On the morning of October 5th, the 2 convoys saw each other. The sea between them shimmered in fragile stillness, as though it too were listening. At 9 o'clock, the first signal flags rose on the British masts. Bustamante raised his glass, squinting into sunlight, and saw the colours of Amphion, indefatigable, lively, and Medusa. He knew what they meant. He could have turned back toward Portugal. He could have submitted to inspection. But to yield without cause was to confess guilt, and the honour of Spain weighed heavy on every officer's heart. A warning shot cracked the calm, a single cannon's cough that echoed like a storm's prelude. The Spanish crew scrambled to arms. Men ran the guns out, ropes slapping against wood, powder boys stumbling with cartridges. The smell of salt turned sharp with fear. Bustamante shouted orders. The flags of Spain lifted high. For a heartbeat, the sea held its breath. Then came the second shot, then a third, then all of them. The Mercedes shook beneath the first broadside. Iron met oak. Splinters flew like arrows. Within minutes, smoke veiled the horizon, a moving wall of whitened gunfire. The Medea and Clara returned fire. The farmer tried to maneuver between ships, her cannons flashing in rhythm with the thunder. For 20 minutes the sea burned. Gulls wheeled in panic, their cries lost in the roar. Then, a sound deeper than any gun. A hollow boom, rising from the core of the Mercedes. The powder magazine had caught. The explosion split the ship open as if the sea itself had swallowed her whole. Masts shattered. Decks flew apart. A cloud of smoke climbed to the heavens and hung there, a black flower unfurling in the wind. When the air cleared, there was nothing but debris and silence. The Mercedes was gone. Coins spilled from torn chests and spiraled downward through columns of light, flashing once, twice, then vanishing into dark. Over 200 souls followed them. The remaining ships struck their colours. The battle was over before noon. The survivors clung to wreckage, their voices faint against the waves. The British ships lowered boats, pulling them aboard with weary hands. Even more, who had won, looked upon the floating remains and felt no triumph. The sea rolled on, indifferent. Timbers sank, ash settled, the smell of powder thinned. Below, in the growing dark, the Mercedes settled slowly to the seabed. Her hull landed upright, bow to the east, her treasure still cradled in shattered compartments. Sand began its slow descent, grain by grain covering the wounds. By nightfall, the spot was empty. Only ripples marked where she had been. Time drifted forward like silt. Years folded into decades, decades into centuries. Empires fell, flags changed. The sea forgot their names. Currents wove blankets of sand across the wreck. Coral began its patient work, binding wood to stone. Tiny fish darted through the gun ports, the new inhabitants of an old grave. Above, storms came and went. Whales passed overhead like shadows of mountains. The world above learned to fly, to wire, to war again. Yet the Mercedes slept unchanged, a dream suspended in black water. By the late 20th century, men had finally built eyes strong enough to pierce the abyss. Sonar traced the outlines of forgotten ships. Cameras carried light where no light had ever been. The ocean's secrecy began to thin. Among those who listened to the sea's whispers was a small band of explorers, engineers, historians, dreamers, working from a quiet port in Florida. Their company name was Odyssey Marine Exploration. They believed that history could be touched again, that technology could recover what time had hidden. Critics called them fortune hunters. They called themselves archaeologists of the impossible. In 2007, they began a mission that would change them forever. A mission codenamed Black Swan. Black Swan. 2 simple words on a whiteboard in a windowless room in Tampa. No coordinates, no explanation. Only a code that promised mystery. To the engineers and divers of Odyssey Marine Exploration, it meant a question the world had forgotten to ask. What still sleeps beneath us? They were not pirates or poets, though some carried both in their blood. They were technicians, archaeologists, programmers, cartographers. People who spent their lives listening to static and numbers until the sea spoke through them. Outside, the Gulf of Mexico shimmered like quicksilver. Inside, screens glowed blue, tracking the pulse of the Atlantic floor thousands of miles away. The Odyssey Explorer was small by ocean standards, but she carried a heart of circuits and light. Fiber optic cables wound through her hull like veins. Her deck was quiet except for the hum of compressors and the soft ticking of sonar. They launched at dawn when the sea is still undecided between night and day. The ROV, remotely operated vehicle, descended slowly, its light spreading into the void. At 300 meters, colors began to fade. At 500, blue turned to gray. At 1,000, only the lamps remained, white as ghost fire. The operators spoke little. Each image that flickered onto the monitors felt fragile, as though sound might shatter it. Sand, rocks, a scattering of shells. Then, something unnatural. A curve too perfect, a line too deliberate. Metal. They adjusted thrusters, drew closer. A cannon, half buried. Another, toppled and coated in coral. And beside it, a coin, half the size of a man's palm, glinting beneath a veil of silt. No one breathed. The ROV's arm extended, brushed the sand aside, and light struck silver. The sea had begun to remember. For weeks, they hovered above that patch of seabed. Every contour was traced, every anomaly photographed. The wreck lay in fragments, as if the ocean had tried to erase its lines, but failed to forget its story. Timbers collapsed inward, cannons tilted at strange angles, and across it all a drift of coins. Some stacked neatly as they had been packed 2 centuries before, others scattered like spilled constellations. Each glint of metal was logged with coordinates precise to a breath. Each object was lifted gently, sealed, labeled and stored. The divers watched them rise through the dark water, tiny worlds emerging from night. Above, on deck, salt wind mingled at the smell of oil and electronics. They did not cheer. They simply watched the first basket of treasure break the surface. Coins cascading in slow motion, sunlight turning them white gold. The historians among them began to read. Each coin carried a sentence from history. Mint marks from Lima and Potosi. Latin mottos, royal profiles that time had softened but not erased. Dates between 1790 and 1803. Reales and escudos, silver and gold. In the lab, they were washed and photographed, and their stories unfolded one by one. Some bore the faint burn of explosion, warped edges, blackened centers. Others were untouched, perfect circles of empire. The weight told them something more. They were not random cargo, not colonial trade. They were organized, documented, valuable beyond imagination. The treasury of a government, not a merchant. The question whispered itself across the deck. Had they found a warship? Evenings aboard Odyssey Explorer were silent celebrations. The crew would gather at the stern as the sun fell, the sky dissolving into amber and indigo. Someone might play a faint tune on a harmonica, its notes drifting into the wind. They did not speak of the gold. They spoke of pressure depths, of data cables, of the way the current shifted with the moon. But underneath, each felt the same pulse, the old, unnameable thrill of rediscovery. They had reached into darkness and pulled time back into their hands. When they returned to Gibraltar, the world still slept. The crates were sealed, the data encrypted, the operation filed under its codename, Black Swan. They spoke little to journalists. The official statement was bland, clinical. Deep-sea recovery of historical artifacts. But rumors began, as rumors always do, spreading faster than truth. An unnamed wreck, coins by the ton, possibly $500 million in value. Governments listened, historians speculated. Spain, silent at first, began to watch closely. The sea, once again, had stirred ghosts. News reached Madrid through back channels and whispers. Officials at the Ministry of Culture pulled old maps from archives. Naval historians compared casualty lists, ship movements, logs lost and found. The pattern pointed to one possibility: a frigate lost in 1804 near Cape Santa Maria, the Nuestra Señora de las Mercedes. If the treasure was hers, it was not just gold. It was a nation's memory. Spain's archives held copies of her last manifest, cargo of 500,000 silver reals, 200,000 gold escudos, plus personal effects, gifts, and correspondence to the crown. Everything matched. The conclusion was inevitable. Spain announced its claim. On the other side of the Atlantic, the team at Odyssey Marine read the headlines in disbelief. They had worked in silence, with permits, within international waters, or so they believed. Now their find had become a diplomatic riddle. To them, the Mercedes was an archaeological site. To Spain, she was a national tomb. The tone remained civil, but the undercurrent of tension was unmistakable. Letters became statements, statements became lawsuits. The Black Swan had taken flight, and the world was watching. The news rippled outward like a tide. By midsummer of 2007, newspapers began to hum with speculation. Treasure worth $500 million recovered in secret. Mysterious shipwreck off Portugal, identity unknown. And quietly, from Madrid. Could it be ours? Historians in university offices leaned over grainy images of coins and fragments. Archivists compared mint marks to those of colonial mints closed 2 centuries before. Every mark of Lima, every crown monogram, every faded Carolus III whispered the same possibility. The Mercedes was awakening. Odyssey's headquarters in Florida filled with letters, some curious, others stern. Requests for information, demands for proof, warnings wrapped in legal formality. The company responded with careful silence, citing proprietary archaeological data that had not revealed the wreck's coordinates. They argued that it lay in international waters, far beyond territorial claim. Yet the sea, once a boundary, now became a courtroom. Spain's lawyers saw another story. To them, this was not salvage. It was repatriation. The coins, the timbers, the cannons, each was a fragment of national soul. A vessel of the Royal Navy of Spain, lost in battle, carrying citizens and soldiers. By maritime law, they argued, she could not be owned by anyone but Spain herself. What began as a discovery slowly transformed into an argument about history's very ownership. Far below the surface, nothing had changed. Currents brushed across the wreck. Silt drifted as it always had. The remains of the Mercedes cared little for courts or claims. Her decks were home now to coral fans and slow, drifting anemones. Fish slipped through cannon ports, darting between ribs of wood that had once held men. Here, gold had lost its luster. Here, value meant survival in the quiet dark. The ocean, eternal witness, simply waited for humans to finish their quarrel. Inside the Archivo General de Indias in Seville, sunlight filtered through high windows and fell upon yellowing paper. Clerks unrolled maps drawn in faded ink, tracing trade routes from South America to Spain. One record, dated September 1804, bore the seal of the crown: cargo, precious metals, goods, correspondence. Ship, Nuestra Señora de las Mercedes. A letter from Captain Bustamante himself still survived. He wrote of calm weather, of the promise of home, of loyalty to king and country. The archivist paused upon his signature, faint but legible. To them, it was a voice returned from the deep. When the Spanish government read those words, any doubt dissolved. The treasure found by Odyssey was the treasure of the Mercedes. In 2008, Spain filed suit in US federal court, claiming the recovery as sovereign property. Odyssey Marine, in response, declared that the wreck lay beyond any nation's borders. The case moved slowly, like the turning of tides. Affidavits, depositions, expert testimony. Historians debated in journals. Talk shows reduced centuries of maritime law to sound bites. But in courtrooms, the mood was subdued, almost reverent. Each coin, each shard, was presented as evidence, a relic held under sterile light. The judge listened while attorneys read from 19th century treaties, from letters written by sailors long dead. History, suddenly, had become living testimony. Outside those walls, public opinion shifted like sandbars. Some saw Odyssey as modern explorers, scientists reaching into darkness. Others saw plunderers disguised as archaeologists, and always in the background, the slow murmur of the sea. Within Odyssey's labs, technicians continued to catalogue each object. They measured corrosion, catalogued alloys, preserved fragments of cloth that had survived against all odds. Even amid the noise of accusation, there was still the quiet devotion of curiosity. Each artifact they held was delicate, beautiful, and full of melancholy. A spoon with a pattern worn smooth by use. A musket trigger still crusted with salt. A coin folded by blast pressure, its king's profile bent into abstraction. They were touching memory itself. And memory does not belong neatly to one flag. The lawsuit stretched into years. Spain's representatives invoked international conventions, citing the UNESCO Convention on the Protection of Underwater Cultural Heritage. Odyssey pointed to salvage rights, freedom of navigation, discovery zones beyond jurisdiction. Judges deliberated, appealed, remanded. The gold sat silent in secure storage, each coin a witness in exile. Meanwhile, the ocean kept its rhythm. Storms passed over the coordinates of the wreck, unseen and unrecorded, and the Atlantic folded them into its endless cycle. Human time moved in papers and hearings. Ocean time moved in tides. Those who had been aboard Odyssey Explorer spoke rarely about the dispute. When they did, their words were soft, as if trying not to wake something sacred. One diver described the first time he saw the coins. They looked like stars, and I thought, maybe they were never meant for us. Another said he had dreamt of the wreck every night since. It felt alive, like the sea didn't want us there. They were scientists, yet even they felt a sense of trespass. To touch something untouched for 200 years is to hear the faint echo of its owners breathing behind you. In Spain, the case stirred something deeper than money. Elderly visitors came to museums asking about the Mercedes. Children wrote school essays about the lost ship of our ancestors. The treasure had become a symbol, not of wealth, but of return. It was the echo of sailors lost, the reminder of empire's reach and its fragility. No one alive had seen that ship sail, yet its story felt personal, as if it had never truly left their waters. By 2011, after years of filings and appeals, the case reached its final hearing. Odyssey's lawyers argued that to return the coins was to punish discovery itself. Spain's counsel answered that heritage could not be bought or sold. The courtroom was silent as the final ruling was read. The judge spoke slowly, with a gravity that seemed to belong to the sea itself. The treasure was the property of Spain. The Nuestra Señora de las Mercedes was a military vessel. Her cargo, and the souls who carried it, remained part of the nation that had lost them. There was no applause, no protest, just the turning of pages, the shuffle of chairs, and the realization that the journey of gold across 2 centuries had found its end. The ruling carried across the ocean like a wave that could not be seen but could be felt. In Madrid, officials read the verdict in measured silence. In Florida, the Odyssey team stood beneath the fluorescent hum of their offices, each person absorbing the words in their own quiet way. Some felt injustice, others inevitability. All felt the strange stillness that comes when a story you've been part slips out of your hands and returns to time itself. In February of 2012, under the pale light of dawn, 2 C-130 Hercules aircraft left a military base in Florida. Inside were 594,000 coins, gold and silver, packed into sealed containers, catalogued, numbered, their total weight over 17 tons. The pilots flew east, across the same expanse of water that had once claimed the Mercedes. Below, the Atlantic rolled in quiet indifference, its surface calm, its heart unchanged. When the planes landed at Torrejon Air Base near Madrid, soldiers in crisp uniforms watched as the crates were carried down the ramp, not as trophies, but as something far older. As if the country itself had just retrieved its pulse from the sea. In a vault beneath the Ministry of Culture, the containers were opened one by one. The air smelled faintly of metal and salt. Coins were poured carefully onto linen-covered tables, rivers of silver, scattered stars of gold. Each piece bore its own faint scars, some warped, some polished by sand, some engraved with faces that time had thinned to whispers. Historians leaned close, reading the patterns of oxidation like astronomers reading constellations. It was not just treasure, it was testimony. The coins told of trade routes between Peru and Spain, of labor in the mines of Potosi, of the wealth that fueled an empire, and the ships that carried its hope across endless miles of blue. Every piece was an artifact of human hands, and every hand behind it had vanished long ago. When the treasure was finally displayed, the people came in quiet procession. Children pressed their faces to glass cases. Old men removed their hats. Some wept without quite knowing why. The gold shone not as wealth but as memory. Light from another century, finally returned to its source. Museums described it as the treasure of the Mercedes, a phrase that carried both triumph and sorrow, because beneath the glass, behind the shimmer, there was always the unspoken, that these coins were once carried by men who never came home. Far below, at the coordinates where the Mercedes fell, her broken ribs still rest on the ocean floor. Her timbers crumble slowly, her cannons lie scattered in silence, and her shadows remain untouched by daylight. The treasure may have left, but the ship endures as a skeleton of memory. Sometimes, in the ROV footage still stored in Odyssey's archives, you can see a slow drift of sand passing through empty decks, a reminder that all things, even gold, are temporary guests in the house of the sea. Odyssey Marine Exploration continued its work, though the Black Swan case became a haunting presence. It followed them into conferences, into interviews, into their dreams. Some of the crew said they felt pride, that they had uncovered history and brought it to light. Others confessed to melancholy, that in finding it, they had lost something invisible. One of the lead engineers once said in a rare interview, "It's strange. We set out to find gold, but what we really found was how time forgives no one, not even the sea." The company turned its focus to other wrecks, but none ever carried the same quiet gravity. The Black Swan had become their myth, their Icarus, their lesson in wonder and restraint. For historians, the Mercedes recovery redrew the line between discovery and preservation. It forced the world to ask what it means to own the past. Is history property or inheritance? Is a coin a relic or a witness? The answer, perhaps, lies not in law, but in reverence. Because what the Black Swan revealed was not only the glint of lost gold, but the truth that memory is the only treasure that outlasts the sea. In Spain's Naval Museum, where the coins now rest under steady light, visitors move slowly through the exhibits, their footsteps soft against the marble. Each display is arranged like a stanza. Cannons, pistols, navigational tools, the ship's bell, and finally the coins themselves, spread out like sunlight caught in glass. A placard beside them reads, "Recovered from the depths of the Atlantic, 2007 to 2012. Property of the Spanish state. Memory of those lost aboard the frigate Mercedes. 1804, no mention of lawsuits or bitterness, only of time and return." Outside the museum, the sea is never far. From the promenade in Cadiz, the horizon stretches in the same calm line it did 2 centuries ago. Waves brush against the stone in quiet repetition, each one folding into the next, each one whispering the same refrain. Nothing is truly lost, only waiting to be remembered. As the years passed, the Black Swan became both legend and caution, a tale retold among maritime archaeologists in late-night bars and quiet conference halls. They spoke of it as one might speak of an old friend, with affection, frustration, and awe. Some said the treasure cursed those who touched it. Others said it had blessed them with purpose. Perhaps both were true, because the sea, vast and ancient, asks for reverence, not conquest. And when humans forget this, the ocean finds its own ways of reminding them. Years passed. The headlines that once burned in every newspaper dimmed to footnotes, their urgency replaced by newer storms. But history never forgets those who stir its depths. The Black Swan case lingered quietly in law books, in museum placards, and in the restless dreams of those who had been there. Sometimes, a journalist would write a retrospective. Whatever happened to the Odyssey treasure? The answer, always the same. It rests now in Spain, behind glass, gleaming softly beneath measured light. Yet the real treasure, the one that can't be catalogued or weighed, is invisible. The story itself, still unfolding in the minds of those who remember. Picture it now. The Atlantic, endless and silver in late twilight, the air still, the surface glassy. Somewhere below, in the dark, lie fragments of the Mercedes, her wood turned to shadow, her iron returning slowly to dust. No flag marks the place, only a stillness, only the quiet pulse of water pressing down, folding centuries into itself. Here, time has no edges. Every second dissolves into the next, like salt into current. If you could descend there now, you would find no treasure, no glory, only the hush of forgotten things sleeping in their own kind of peace. And yet, the imagination refuses to leave that space empty. It fills it with ghosts. Not the vengeful kind, but the serene sort that drift like memory. Sailors who once walked her decks now move through water as easily as through air. They stand beside the cannons, hands resting on invisible rails, their faces calm beneath the flicker of light from unseen lamps. If you listen closely, you might hear a low hum, the ship's timbers singing to themselves, a lullaby of oak and salt. It is not sorrowful, it is not proud, it is simply there, an acceptance that all journeys end in silence. Somewhere, perhaps on a porch in Florida, an older man sits with a cup of coffee, listening to the ocean through the distance. He was once part of that crew, the team who found the treasure that changed everything. He doesn't speak of it much anymore. When asked, he smiles and says, "It was beautiful." That's all that matters, because beauty, in its truest form, does not belong to anyone. It passes through us. It chooses us for a moment, then drifts back to the deep. In Madrid, under soft museum light, curators dust the glass each morning. They handle the coins with cotton gloves, turning them gently so that every visitor may see both faces, the monarch and the emblem, power and promise, the duality of all empire. Children point and ask, "Did someone really find these?" And the guide nods, smiling, because the story is half legend now, and legends are what the sea gives when it wants to be remembered. Of course, not all was recovered. Not all ever will be. Some coins remain scattered through the sand, embedded in coral, buried under centuries of drift. They gleam when a shaft of sunlight reaches them, then vanish again, untouched by human hands. It is the sea's way of keeping something for itself, a reminder that not everything can be owned, and not every secret should be surfaced. The story of the Black Swan asks us to listen, to the patience of time, to the humility of discovery, to the idea that what we find is often not what we were seeking. Odyssey went searching for gold. Spain sought justice. The world found a mirror, a reflection of our longing to connect with the past, to hold something enduring in a world that is always slipping away. Perhaps that is why the story endures, because every listener becomes a diver, descending into history, reaching for a glint of light that might just be memory. Night returns to the Atlantic. The waves breathe slow against the hulls of passing ships. Somewhere, the water folds gently over the bones of the Mercedes. The moon paints a trembling path across the surface, and for a moment, you could believe the world is holding its breath. In that stillness, you understand. The treasure was never the gold. It was the act of finding. The quiet miracle of revealing what time had hidden. The tenderness of touching something lost and then letting it go. Imagine standing by the sea at dusk. The tide is low, the sky violet and gold. You close your eyes and hear the rhythm of waves against stone. Steady, endless, ancient. That sound is the same one heard by sailors in 1804, by explorers in 2007, by you now. It is the song of continuity, the whisper of the world reminding us that all stories, like all tides, come home in the end. The sea remains, The coins gleam quietly in their cases. The divers grow older. The ship sleeps. And somewhere between them all, between memory and water, between discovery and loss, the Black Swan still drifts, weightless, endless, beautiful,